Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to those who weren't able to be with us this morning. So a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have covered some of the policy things this morning. So this afternoon, we're covering some of the land allocations. For those who missed my intro this morning, I just want to clarify the purpose of the scrutiny and them inviting LPAG to join our meeting today. And we have scrutiny members on this side and local plan advisory group members on that side, with officers around the room and cabinet down there. I haven't introduced myself. I'm Councillor Caroline Brooke. I'm chair of the scrutiny committee. So because we're looking at adopting the new local plan, we felt it was important to have scrutiny over the technical details. Do we feel there's any showstoppers with regards to the policies that are going out to consultation? So part of this committee is not to say whether we agree with policies or whether we agree with land allocations. It's looking at the details behind it to say whether this report is ready to go out to consultation before we then feedback on those parts. So I just wanted to clarify that for the room. So this afternoon we have, as it's changed, 7 public speakers and a councillor. I'll read out your names, so if you could make me aware of where you are, and then I'll check whether there's anybody else who was expecting to speak that I haven't mentioned. So I've got David Killeen, Brendan Gibbs. Brendan not here. James Anderson. Thank you, James. June Perrins. Thank you. David Baldwin. Trevor Salter. Chris Rees. And Councillor Frank Pearson's here with us. Is there anybody else in the room who is expecting to speak who I haven't mentioned? No? Wonderful. So in that case, we will start with public participation for this afternoon session. So can I call David Killeen forwards? All members of the public speaking will have 3 minutes to speak. A timer will come up on the screen in front of you so you can see how much time you have left. And we welcome your thoughts. I haven't mentioned you're all being audio recorded, and that there will be a recording published later as well. So you're also streaming live. So with that in mind, David Killeen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, officers and councillors. I'm Chair of Hursley Parish Council, and in the allocations, just covering that piece, we do not have an allocation in Hursley, so we are comfortable with that because we're 95% farmland. We do have a neighbourhood plan in progress with a few sites around the village that we may do something with, but that will come out in due course. The main part of what I wanted to say, really, there was this morning in particular that many uncertainties have arisen.
Sorry, David, could I ask you to speak just a little bit louder, please?
Many uncertainties have arisen, not the least of which is Push and Bushfield. We'll come back to that. The buffer. And I don't really understand the buffer numbers in terms of the overall requirement from government and the figures we're working from. I may need to spend more time looking at it. The ONS data, the housing qualities, John Moore Barracks. Hopefully the government are happy with the reduction in the number of soldiers, but that may change as well. Lots of things being looked at came out as well this morning. Transport was one of them. And my question really is, at what point do these large number of uncertainties become so great? And how can we consult on something we can be almost certain will change at this point in time?
Thank you, Mr. Killeen. I appreciate your time today. Could I call James Anderson forward then, please? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Your 3 minutes will start as soon as you start talking.
Good afternoon, councillors and officers. My comments all concern South Wonston. Winchester City Council have set out principles for the plan in the strategic issues document, the Your Place, Your Plan. The principles are in 3 sections: National Planning Policy Framework, Planning Advisory Service, and WCC's Plan Priorities. The proposals for South Wonston are contrary to those principles. The NPPF, paragraph 15, calls for a positive vision. No vision is stated for South Wonston. NPPF, paragraph 82, calls for sustainable economic growth. There is no employment in South Wonston or nearby, no economic growth, and no basis for additional housing. The PAS calls for intended character. No intended character is stated for South Wonston in its rural setting and its 15 houses per hectare. The PAS says generalised aspirations are not locally specific. A housing allocation from WCC or imported from South Hampshire is not South Wonston specific. PAS wants to reflect community priorities. The plan does not do that. PAS does the vision describe your area as opposed to anywhere. The housing allocation is for anywhere. There is nothing local about it. WCC, creating a greener district. Greenfield development is the antithesis of greener. WCC, homes for all built in the right area for changing communities. Where is the logic for the allocation to South Wonston? WCC, transition to a greener economy. How might housing that is remote from employment, at the end of a 1-mile cul-de-sac, whose secondary schools and medical services are in other places, whose primary school is oversubscribed and the overflow pupils being bused or carred to other places, how can this be described as transitioning to a greener economy? It is on these grounds that the plan will be challenged at stage 6. Thank you, everyone. Secretary is welcome to a copy if required.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And I should say that if you could all send your points and questions directly in to us to where you registered to speak, that would be really helpful, because then we can make sure the officers cover the points that we've raised. If you're able to send in your questions or comments to the same address where you registered to speak, that would be really helpful to make sure the officers cover all the comments. Many thanks. June Perrins, please. Save you sitting down again.
Chairman, officers, councillors, my thanks for allocating me time to provide you with a clear case that the South Wonston Parish Council and residents do not agree with your strategy plan to develop 40 new homes on the site located at West Hill Road North, which is outside of the settlement boundary. The timing of the publication of the plan and the setting of a housing figure is odd, given the huge uncertainty surrounding the potential reforms to planning being considered by the government and how it will derive future housing numbers. Basingstoke Council has delayed its plan because of this uncertainty. The current housing figures are based on an outdated information, and the 2021 census data, which is now available, provides a more robust starting point. The council have included 1,450 extra homes to cover the possibility of other districts not meeting their own requirement. for example, the South Hampshire authorities. The justification for the figure and how it has been arrived at is not clear and seems premature, as even the South Hampshire authorities don't know what the figures are. And as recently as July of this year, said the strategy setting out the overall housing requirement will not be published until much later next year. As a consequence of this approach, places like South Wonston have been allocated a site for housing, which in effect are providing for an unknown requirement from areas in a different housing market. The flawed approach is compounded by the reliance on a settlement hierarchy, which, despite submissions by the parish council, does not provide an accurate picture. E.g., South Wonston scores the same as Winchester City under public transport, and in the overall scoring based on daily facilities is only 2 points below the city. South Wonston has a poor, expensive bus service, which runs infrequently and not of any benefit to commuters. There seems to be an inconsistent approach to development that counts towards settlement numbers. There has been significant residential development within South Wonston Parish at Worthy Down, which doesn't appear in the table for South Wonston at all, page 339. In contrast, Wickham, page 337, has been allowed to count development at Knoll, which is the parish of Wickham but not part of the settlement, and is I do. Okay, so basically my conclusion is that the South Wonston Parish Council rejected all of the Sheila sites for good reason. The West Hill Road site is a sensitive landscape, and access to this site and the movement of significant increase in cars will result in the approach side road to the site becoming a severe pressure point for those wishing to traverse this road. Thank you. I have a copy which I will send to you. Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. I'm also from South Wonston. I hope you took on board what Councillor Perrin has just said. The Parish Council has already rejected all the sites proposed in a document which required a lot of work. I'm afraid we got the impression that it had been largely ignored. There are issues. Drainage. All the properties north of La Frenais Place are not on mains drainage. It would be very expensive to provide mains drainage for this site. Water pressure. This is a problem in the village. The addition of 40 houses will only exacerbate that problem. The main issue, the environment. You have declared a climate emergency. Your number one objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Number two, to reduce the use of the private car. 40 houses means 40 plus more cars, more likely 80. Look around the village and you will see 2 or more cars in every driveway. Why? Because public transport is derisory and expensive. The shop and school would be sufficiently far away to tempt people to use their cars. The surgery is in Sutton, Scrutiny, not in South Wonston, and already under strain. There is no employment in the village. 40 houses means 40 plus children to get to school by car. The village primary school is full. Parents of children in Worthy Down, which is in the parish, cannot get places in the school. So more car journeys to get children to school elsewhere. This is a greenfield site, and you are supposed to be pushing brownfield site developments. Kestrels, red kites, and buzzards are seen over this site. These issues you regarded as minor negatives, which would be laughable if it wasn't a reprehensible distortion of the facts. Access, an equally important issue which cannot be stressed enough. The site abuts West Hill Road North at its narrowest and most dangerous point, just before a dangerous 90-degree blind turning into Alresford Drove. 2 cars can just get past each other, not so with anything bigger, of which there is a lot. lorries which should not be there, huge tractors, fast-moving delivery vans. You propose a pavement on the east side, which is ridiculous, as it would have to stop at number 1 Alresford Drove, the bungalow right on the corner, meaning pedestrians would have to cross to the other side at the most dangerous point with cars whizzing round the blind corner, and they do whiz. A pavement on the other side would mean ripping out a well-established hedgerow full of small birds. This would be necessary too for the creation of sight lines for cars emerging from the site. Just imagine the danger to children coming out of this site to go to school. It hardly bears thinking about, let alone the many walkers accessing the bridle paths of the vicinity, cyclists, and many horse riders. There is no way that this stretch of road can be widened if a pavement is to be added. There isn't room. 2,000 homes are going up on Barton Farm. I hear they are not selling very well. In La Frenay Place, which comprises affordable homes, a house or flat has been on the market for months. Your calculations as to need have been shown to be inconsistent, if not inaccurate. The fact of the matter is that I'm concluding. The fact of the matter is that South Wonston has reached its physical limits due to the topography and the exit and entrance points. The village is under considerable strain from traffic, and there are dangerous pinch points outside the school and shop and at this very location. Thank you. It's too short.
Can I have Trevor Salter, please? Your time will begin when you start speaking.
Thanks to the chair and everybody present for the chance to speak. Just some points on the land at West Hill Road North. Any development which includes any other sites in such a way to minimise, this is South Wonston, by the way, sorry. Any development in the documentation, it says in such a way to minimise visual intrusion into the wider landscape. Also, on environment, it actually says important to protect wider views to the north, minimise light pollution and visual intrusion into the wider countryside area. I have questions. The proposed 40 houses is greater than the 15 hectare typical of the parish. When would the type of housing and impact to the wider views be understood and communicated? Single story or double story? Can we be reassured that 3-story townhouses would not get permission? Light pollution is almost zero to the north. Will there be an assessment for light pollution and potential loss of a beautiful night sky? Has ample consideration gone into the Brownfield oil site on the A272 before considering greenfield agricultural sites? Also in the document, the junction of Drove Road has poor visibility. Has or will assessments be carried out and communicated on the risk of the single track road with a blind bend? The village is effectively a 1 mile cul-de-sac. Any development will add risk to the village road and pedestrian users and push traffic towards the Drove. On the infrastructure, do not currently have adequate main sewage drainages in the document. Has or will an assessment be carried out and communicated on any detrimental effect on existing services, including clean water supply, pressure and capacity required? Schools and GP surgery, are there any additional spaces being provided for what I understand to be full school and GP surgery? We and many of our neighbours move to and remain in South Wonston because it is a rural and provides a soothing environment, a sense of well-being and a low potential for development. as opposed to the urban area with a higher potential for development, I ask that if there is capacity and suitability in a more urban area or brownfield site, that this is considered. We must keep and treasure our agricultural open space.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Chris Rees. I'm the Planning Director at Alfred Homes. I've sat in front of many of you before and worked with colleagues on the left-hand side. I want to talk about the Brownfield First principle. So as a local developer, we recognise the Council's approach to prioritising brownfield land, and indeed, a number of years ago, we invested in the studies required to bring forward the Littleton Nursery. It's not a site in the local plan, which is why I'm sat here. So for members who don't know the land, this is a 2-hectare parcel of land adjoining the village of Littleton, just to the north of Winchester. It's currently used as a B8 storage yard and has been recognised by officers as being brownfield within the Sheila studies. It lies, as I say, just to the north of Winchester, within 2 kilometres of all the services within Week, so doctors, surgeries, supermarkets, shops. So it is a sustainable location. And in respect of Mr. Fox's commentary this morning on the barracks, given it is within Littleton parish, such as the barracks, it could contribute towards Winchester's housing numbers. And there's a parallel between those 2 sites, both being brownfield land. And yet, having put forward the land under a Brownfield First local plan, it's been overlooked by the allocation of greenfield sites. Not only greenfield sites, but greenfield sites currently within local gaps within the adopted local plan. Sequentially, that cannot be a sound approach in putting forward this local plan for examination, where there are brownfield sites not selected and sites currently in local gaps that have been. So, members, in respect to the credibility of the Brownfield First principle, I would ask the committee to question whether all opportunities for brownfield site delivery have been taken in forming the draft Regulation 18 local plan. And if they haven't, and you're convinced that they haven't been taken, to undertake a review of all of the brownfield opportunities as they exist to amend this draft before going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rees. And Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak a second time. It's almost like an award for having a long, I can't think of the word now, wasting time anyway. Well, first, I'll make a comment about the sites, of what you say about the sites. I'd like to congratulate the officers, because while I don't necessarily agree with all of the sites, that's not my function here now. I like what you've said about each site, the explanations you've given as to why those sites have been chosen. Whether people agree with that, that's another matter. It's up to the individual parishes. Now, I'm looking particularly, obviously, about my own ward and Bishop Waltham to a degree. My village, Swanmore, and Bishop Waltham are one of these parishes that's half in terms of area, half within South Downs National Park and half not. In both cases, the overwhelming majority of houses, of course, are not in the park. Some are, including my own in Swanmore. And that is the issue which you discussed this morning. One of the other things I've got in mind about this when I'm talking about this, because it's common to Corden Common and Twyford, or indeed Winchester itself, is the notional number of 500 additional houses that we are hoping to put within the national park. Now, from what I understand about the park's policies, and speaking from a town planning point of view, looking at the village concerned, one of the things that's happened, of course, is that new houses are going in farther and farther away from the village centre. So you're coming into competition with the 15-minute rule. which is a logical one. It makes sense. Indeed, why use a car if you're within literal walking distance, 15 minutes from the village centre? And I've got to say, some people in my village do just that. Their excuse being to get to the primary school, village centre, they've got to get in the car to take the child because it might be raining, might not be raining, might be sunburn, whatever reason, they're in a car and it adds to the congestion around the junior school. Nothing in the policies is going to stop that. And I think because we're a rural area, trying to say, no, you must use a bus frankly isn't the answer, because to do most of our shopping, we have to have transport to a shopping area, not necessarily a bus service to get that point. I know there are community buses, but you'll discuss that yourselves. Now, coming back to the 500, what we are thinking, if I was looking, I'm not praising, I'm just wondering if those 500 houses are actually going to go on the edge of the existing villages that border the national park. Certainly it is one of the concerns that's passed the mind of Bishop's Waltham Parish Council when you look at their site, which is on page 296 of the big copy. Keep on referring to a copy I don't know anything about because the page numbers are all different. It's a land north of Rareridge Lane, right literally on the edge of the park. Now there's concern if there is any more housing in that direction, then that effectively would be an extension of that. May or may not be, I'm speculating. Within my own parish, all the development has moved away from the park boundary, as you'd expect. The sites that are there, page 366, are actually two of the three sites mentioned. Already one has planning permission, one already has built on, and one still speculating about because there's no access to a road, any road, save through another site that hasn't actually been built on, although it's got planning permission. And that comes down to another issue in the country areas, rural lanes. You've got no definition of what a rural lane is in these planning policies. Now, that's one of the crucial points in the environmental section. You refer to them as important as a consideration. Now, the other site is in Shedfield, very quickly. Now, that is a contentious site. You're going to have issues about that. It was a Schla site. It is now a Sheila site. It's been a site for many a long year, but it's a contaminated site. It's an employment site. You want to put 100 houses on it. Locally, they think it's too many. Next door to a junior school, some people say, well, great, next to a junior school. Some not too sure about that because it takes land that was allocated to the junior school. So that is one.
Pearson, your time's out.
I'm just finishing now, literally, Chair. That is one you're going to get letters about, understandably. But as far as I'm concerned, I like the way you've dealt with these sites. Obviously, I don't necessarily agree with them, but I like the way you've dealt with them. Thank you very much, whoever did that. I don't know whether it was one of the team anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for being tolerant for 50 seconds.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Can you turn off the microphone, please? Thank you. Much appreciated. So thank you to all of those who've put forward points this morning. The officers have been scribbling away and will hopefully address those as we go through the afternoon or separately in the cabinet paper. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. Could I or one of the officers just go through again why we have the buffer? Because I think it would be useful for the people here to hear that. It's a different audience than it was this morning, but it's relevant and it's very relevant to this afternoon's conversation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Finch.
Yes, thank you. Just to reiterate what we went through this morning. essentially, we could just do a plan for Regulation 18 consultation that just meets our own need. And the way that that's calculated is it's done annually, and it's done with a standard method provided by the government. And that produces a figure which is currently 715 homes per year. However, to do that would be very, very risky. And the reason it would be risky is threefold. The first one is the figure that we are given effectively by the government formula, as I said before, is refreshed annually, normally I think at about March or April time. And what that means is that figure is subject to change. And it's unlikely in a place like Winchester, which obviously doesn't score favourably in terms of affordability, which is one of the factors, that figure could easily increase. And generally over time, it has gone up from sort of in the 600s just to 715 currently. And we may expect it to go up again early in the new year. And what that means is, given the fact we're planning over a 15-year period, that even a small increase is significant, or can be when you aggregate it over that period of time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we do have duty to cooperate, which means we have to liaise and speak with our neighbours. The ones with the biggest challenges in terms of not being able to meet their own housing needs are the ones in the south, and generally members of Partnership for South Hampshire, which we're also a member of course, which you will know. And so we have a duty to cooperate through the plan making process. And if they are genuinely unable to meet their own housing needs, then we have to take that into consideration. It's, I said this morning, it's not a duty to, it's a duty to cooperate, not a duty to agree. So ultimately it's for Winchester to decide how it deals with those issues, but they still need to be dealt with, or else we'll get into difficult stages later down the process. And the third thing that can happen, which doesn't happen very often, but it can do, is if there's a change of mind of somebody that owns a site, for example, that we are proposing to allocate, and for whatever reasons they decide that that site is no longer going to be brought forward, then again we can end up with a shortfall. So what you're trying to do is to give the plan a bit of flex, if you like, to take into account circumstances which we can foresee, but we can't necessarily put a specific figure against. And that's really why that happens. And in actual fact, most authorities will adopt that approach, because otherwise, if they don't, and there is a need increase and they haven't factored it in, it could delay the production of the plan overall. Because when you go to the Regulation 19 stage, that's the next stage on from this one. This is the first full consultation on the draft plan, and it is a draft plan. But once you get to the next stage, then the figure, that only then is that housing figure locally fixed. So only when we reach that point and we're going to submit it to a government inspector can we kind of pin our colours to the mast. So the reason we do it is to try to de-risk that as much as we can, to keep the process as smooth as we can. And that's how we've done it. It's not a specific science, unlike the number we're provided with, which is a number which comes through a formula, which is the standard method. You just have to make a judgment about how you're going to build in some flexibility within your local plan. So hopefully that gives you an indication. So we've done it for a reason, and we've done it to give some flexibility, and hopefully that will keep the plan on track without having to go back a stage if we started to have to find new sites because the number had gone up, or we have to accommodate housing from other local authorities, which we feel is a reasonable and agreeable request. Is that sufficient, Chairman? I don't know. I'm just looking across at my. No, they're nodding. That would be fine. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that great explanation, Mr. Finch. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, rather than like this morning when there were several questions about the levy, and I think it was agreed that we needed to have some explanation to help people understand that methodology. Given the number of comments we've already had, and we had some this morning, about the buffer, would we consider just being a little more explicit about taking Simon's, Mr. Finch's comments and articulating a very clear statement about that in the Cabinet paper so that everyone understands what the purpose is and how that has been approached? And then some who have spoken this afternoon would have clarity about that number and why it's there, as Mr. Finch has explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. So coming on to the development allocations, we start off with the Winchester site allocations. Mr. Fox, would you like to do a brief introduction?
Thank you, Chair. So on your papers on page 273 at the bottom, you'll see a map of Winchester Town. Hopefully it's helpful that we've signposted you to the pages where the policies are obviously for the specific sites. So working from the north, obviously the largest strategic allocation is the Sir John Moore Barracks, where we have made a working assumption of 900 dwellings. And then obviously we've got a major commitment already in the plan for Barton Farm, which obviously got outline planning permission. There is a greenfield site land west of Courtney Road, which you'll see to the right of Barton Farm. Station approach area, that's incorporated the Carfax site, the Cattle Market site and the station approach policy. So there were 3 separate policies in the existing adopted local plan, and the area has been expanded to include some area that has been put forward by Network RAO, and you would be probably aware that consultation has started on kind of the initial work on that. We've got obviously the Winnell industrial estate, which is obviously our primary industrial estate, and obviously roll forward and slightly amended a policy for that. With the CWR, we basically extended the area there to include the area that's covered by the SPD, because that's slightly different to the area that's allocated in the existing adopted plan. And I would bring members' attention to, in the table on the previous page 272, the figure for Central Winchester should be 300 dwellings, not 400 dwellings, which is in line with the SPD. We've included obviously the council-owned site, the Bar End Depot site, as a brownfield site, and we've included a policy on the former River Park Leisure Centre, which no doubt we'll have comments on, and St Peter's Car Park site. Bushfield Camp has been rolled forward and slightly amended and updated. And we've also included a broad policy on allowing basically student accommodation, which is around the University of Winchester, the Royal County Hospital. We're not saying that obviously we're supportive of losing any of those facilities, but it's basically an enabling policy to allow more student accommodation to come forward in acknowledgement that obviously the universities are expanding. So I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Okay, so coming on to W1, the Barton Farm allocation. Just preceding that, we have some background information on Winchester site allocations. Does anybody have any questions on that before we get to Councillor Reid?
Chair, it's not a question. It's the fact that I think I ought to declare that I am a parish councillor within the Newlands development. But the Newlands, sorry, the West of Waterlooville includes both Havant and Newlands parish. Unlike in document SH2CA, which indicates that it's in Wickham, Southwark and Wickham, Southern and Whitley parish.
Thank you. Okay, so W1 coming on to Barton Farm. Does anybody have any questions on that? Councillor Crask.
Apologies, Chair, just maybe the page before 272. Just the windfall allowance of 1,035. Just wondering if there's an explanation of that figure.
Mr. Fox. Steve-O.
Chairman, there is a windfall assessment study that's part of the evidence base. It's on the website. It doesn't break this figure down anymore into where it might be or what it's made up of, but it does assess all the different types of windfall that may happen in Winchester. In Winchester, things like the change of use of existing commercial property through permitted development has made quite a contribution. Obviously, there is substantial scope for redevelopment of existing properties, which might include housing. So the study looks at the potential for all the different types of windfall that may come forward and makes an estimate of how much of that might carry on and be counted towards the housing provisions. But it doesn't sort of allocate them to any part of Winchester in particular.
Any more questions on the Barton Farm W1? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I suppose it's the thorny question that we're all sleepwalking into, which is that the planning permission for Barton Farm talks about the rerouting of the Andover Road, and yet we know there is significant public opinion that doesn't support that now, several years on from when the application was originally put forward. Most recently by the Kings Barton Residents Association petition that they have gathered, but following other activities. There's a large assumption in the proposal about the infrastructure around this development. And I suppose the question is, are we, because the planning permission exists, that is noted, are we just continuing despite the significant public opinion against this, not only in the area of the development, but the surrounding areas as well? Just trying to understand the administration's view of that current level of discussion. Thank you.
Councillor Porter, is that one for you?
I'll start, but I'm sure that Councillor Todd will want to join in. Well, first of all, permission is given for those 2,000 properties. So those 2,000 properties have got permission to go ahead. And we have, contrary to what's been said, actually, they're currently selling off plan. So there's no idea that they would stop. They are also consulting on a neighbourhood centre in the next few weeks. So they are fully expecting to do that. And the routing of the road is, as Kings Barton Residents Association said themselves, they felt it was irrelevant. So I don't believe that there is a need to stop or a risk to the housing being developed. I'm more concerned, to be honest, to make sure that Carla makes some concession towards lower carbon buildings. That's much more important to me at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Todd, did you have something brief you wanted to say?
I'm very aware that there is local concern about the Andover Road, and obviously as local planning authority, you know, that is something that we are indirectly involved in. I've written to the cabinet member at Hampshire, essentially outlining both the concerns of people who are concerned about the diversion or the realignment of Andover Road, but also all the other concerns about the roads in the northern part of the city. I think it's very important that whatever happens, we get an integrated, joined up plan for how the road system works in the north of the city. But I wouldn't expect that to have an impact on either the delivery of housing or the number of housing. I think the one thing to say about that, though, is obviously the time to have sorted out the realignment of Andover Road is in the first 8 years after planning permission had been given, before permission was given to start building houses, before through reserved matters. So there was a window, I think, when it would have been considerably easier to reopen the question. Unfortunately, we weren't the administration at the time when that window was missed.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Okay, moving on to, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. I was actually sitting on the planning committee which granted this permission, and we had a site visit beforehand, and I did actually question the Hampshire County Council highways officer who was promoting this quite in depth, really, because I didn't approve of it either, but nonetheless it got voted through. And his idea was that if we didn't take that road through, then Barton Farm would be a cut-off community. So it was in order to integrate the community. I further regretted that they put all the affordable housing, most of it, along that road. But there we go. Those are the two things that I didn't agree with at the time. But it didn't come from the City Council. It came from the County Council.
Your microphone. For John Moore Barracks and surrounding information on policy W2. Does anybody have any specific questions on this? I know we briefly discussed it earlier. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. Considering that this site has been on the books for some considerable time, it's been on and off with regarding to the military release of the land. And I can understand the possible phasing of development being caused by this thing. If there is a change within governmental policies and the land is not available, what plans are in foot for replacing not just a few hundred, but 900 houses in the locality?
Mr. Fox.
Thank you. Obviously, we can only go on the best evidence that we have, and the best evidence from the DOI is that the site will be available from 2026. Now, obviously, I know that obviously Ed quite rightly said that obviously things change and government policy changes, but that's the best information we have. Obviously, if the 900 doesn't come forward on that site, that comes back to the discussion about the buffer, why we've got a buffer, and obviously where else do we go? Because obviously it's a large brownfield site. We want to make the best opportunity for it. There is uncertainty, but there's uncertainty with a lot of things in life, and we've based it on the best information that we have, that DOI have said, and we're in active pre-app discussions with them, that the site will be available, and we can only go on the best information that we have. And it will come out obviously through the consultation process, but that's all I can assure you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, as you can imagine, I have several. This site is obviously subject to a master plan, which we welcome. In 11.4, though, you don't include councillors in that, and I think councillors should definitely be involved in master plans, so I would welcome the addition of ward councillors to that interested group. This is a large site, and in fact, if you were building at a pretty high density, you could have significantly more houses on the site than we are proposing. But we're talking about previously developed land, and there seems to be a lack of clarity where this is on the site and what is the space proposed for the development. So clarity on that, I think, would be helpful. This is a site currently where, although hundreds of people live and train there, there is a lack of movement. The nature is that the recruits go in and don't come out terribly frequently. But if we have 900 homes on the site with the commensurate family and youngsters and various types of accommodation generating movement, it's not clear to me how we're going to manage that within the context of a park and ride facility that's still obviously up for debate, although indicated in here that it might be on the site, but also back to the question we just raised, which is the Andover Road and the traffic. So a couple of questions on that, Chair. Also, the parish, which Mr. Fox knows, have gained a lot of support for allowing some sort of green area in the north of the site, supported by national bodies and the like. We've not chosen to include that in some of the master plan directives. And I think the parish will be asking you very clearly, why is that? Why have we chosen, although we've put some of the elements in that the parish was seeking, such as the entrance on Kennel Lane, but we haven't chosen to put the green area in on the north, and we could put that in as a requirement. So several questions, Chair, that I think would help to clarify in this document, particularly as we have a detailed policy W2 that sits alongside this this project, but also the need for a master plan that comes in due course. Thank you.
I'll pass to you, Mr. Fox, please.
I think in terms of the whole purpose behind this policy is to develop a master plan in discussion, obviously, with local residents and ward councillors. And that work has not yet concluded. So in terms of obviously narrowing down at this stage, at the plan making stage, the clarity on the PDL land and the developed area, the undeveloped area, I don't think we can go to that stage of refinement at this particular moment in time. That may well change between now and the Reg 18 plan and the Reg 19 plan. In terms of lack of movement, we have got a bullet point under the master plan about strong integration and permeability of pedestrians and cyclists. And I hope that picks up the point that obviously we don't want this to be an isolated settlement. We want it to be integrated with the existing community. So I hope that point will be picked up, and that's a key point of the master plan. And in terms of why the areas to the north not being included, again, that comes down to the master planning process that we don't want to prejudice at this stage. And that's the whole point of producing the master plan for the site.
Does that answer those for you, Councillor Hall?
Chair, I hear what Mr Fox says. I don't understand why a green area in the north would prejudice a master plan when actually we're already saying we don't want an entrance at Kennel Lane, and that is not prejudicing the master plan. So I'm not sure why some things will and some things won't. Maybe there is further clarification on that. Thank you.
Many thanks. Any further questions on this Sir John Moore Barracks and W2? No. Okay, so coming on to W3, the other housing site, St Peter's Car Park. Do we have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Laming, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Edwards.
I am very concerned about this particular idea of developing that area because we know.
Sorry, Councillor Laming, you're going to have to move closer again.
Sorry, Chair. I am very concerned about this particular site because we know it, from a historical point of view, it suffers with flooding, and that's not part of the flood alleviation. It comes up through the drains, and we know that St Peter's School regularly has this problem, as well as some of the other sites. Particularly when we looked at in the planning committee at an application some time ago, we expressed concern about the flooding on this. So therefore I would question this inclusion.
Thank you, Councillor Laming. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at this application, which is for 30 dwellings in almost half a hectare of land, it doesn't strike me as a very dense development of an absolutely city centre site, particularly in the following paragraph, a reference to the need to assess car parking requirements. And I'm just wondering if we're missing a trick here, and there might be a possibility to develop a more intensive and completely car-free site, which would, I'm sure, be of good news to all the people who live on North Walls with its current congestion.
Mr Fox or Councillor Porter, who would like to respond to that one?
Happy for the officer. I'm just going to say there's also the constraint. It's actually used as a public throughway, but I'll pass over to Mr Fox, if that's okay.
Thank you. Well, in terms of Councillor Laming's point, I think obviously if the flooding is an issue, perhaps obviously we could look to put in a criteria about the flooding to make sure that's addressed, because I think that's a straightforward way that we could address it. And in terms of obviously the scale of the development, I think that comes down to, it is quite a complicated site because you've got a conservation area there as well. You've got an air quality management area, and obviously we're saying about 30 dwellings. And I think it comes down to the design process in terms of obviously how this design could come forward. But I think obviously we've just got to be mindful that we are about a conservation area and we're in an air quality management area. So but I think it all comes down to the design process.
Does that answer your questions? Councillor Reid.
Chairman, when we've done site visits around the area, it's been very noticeable that the primary school, the car park is used as a drop-off. What provision might be made for catering for dropping off school children if it's not in the, what exists at the moment? North Walls is a very fast and moving road. So sitting down children in that road is not really a thing to be done.
Councillor Todd, you're looking puzzled, and Councillor Porter.
It's a 20-mile-an-hour road, so I wouldn't say that's fast moving. It's got footways on both sides of the road, particularly at that point. It has a crossing point at that point and a bus stop, which actually we do need to make sure space is made for, because it's a very popular bus stop. But I wouldn't describe it as a fast moving road if the public is using the road as they should do.
To add to that, there are also no proposals to close the car park at River Park, and that would provide a perfectly suitable alternative.
Thank you. Any other questions about St Peter's car park? No. Policy W4, land west of Courtney Road. Do we have any questions on this site? No. Skipping along then to W5, Bushfield Camp. Do we have any? Councillor Laming.
Yeah, this one concerns me more than most of the other sites. First of all, a large proportion of this site has always been promised to the city if it's been developed. Second point is it a brownfield site? Because it's not on the brownfield site register, and it's also within the Compton Gap, which is a very important part of our plans on this particular local plan, where we're saying we're protecting things by the local gap. So can we justify how that is safeguarded?
Mr Fox?
I think this one comes back to the first criteria, which is basically similar to the Sir John Moore Barracks, where it needs to be preceded by obviously a master plan, which obviously needs to involve obviously local people and ward councillors and local people. But I think obviously that's the key part, is the master planning process will need to determine obviously the amount of land that's developed, undeveloped, and where the best position for those buildings would be. But I think it comes down to the master planning process needs to happen, and that obviously has not yet happened yet.
What I'm really suggesting is that we look at the master planning process and put some parameters down in the first place, because otherwise we could end up with developing the whole site, which would be wholly unacceptable to the population in whole, because this is widely used by people on Badger Farm, Oliver's Battery and St Cross, not to mention other parts of the city.
If I can just come back on that, I think that's criteria 3 in the policy about the 20 hectares of the site, which is subject to the built development. It's quite clear about that, which is obviously previously occupied by the Army base. So we've been quite clear that's rolled forward from the existing local plan. No change is happening in terms of obviously that requirement. So we are quite clear about which bits should be developed.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we're going to lose a valuable piece of open gap, and we've got to look at it very, very carefully before we even consider whether it's a possibility to develop this. It's been in and out of the local plan on numerous occasions, and it's always been taken out on the basis of the gap being preserved.
Sorry, Councillor Laming, your microphone's gone off.
Sorry, it was only included in the last local plan because an inspector insisted on it going in. So therefore we've got to be very careful with preserving this area.
Councillor Porter?
I'm just going to quote 1244, which says the master plan will need to promote a positive landscape and heritage-led planning solution for the site. And I think that the subsequent policies protect the obvious value that has as views from the National Park, as well as views from the top of Winchester looking back down into Winchester. And I can assure you that that's the intention of the policies that are set out here. Mr. Todd might like to. Councillor Todd,
Mr.
So
Todd
Mr.
works in
Fox,
traffic, works in asset management. I was just going to say, my clear recollection, and I say this because I turned up at a meeting and spoke against it, was that Councillor George Beckett at the time put Bushfield Camp into the local plan as a knowledge park, which was something I took the Michael out of somewhat. And the intervention by the inspector was not to add Bushfield Park to the plan, which had already been done, but it was to remove the restriction that we'd sought to put upon the type of commercial use that might be done there. But I'm sure, I think Mr. Opacek was around at the time and can correct me if I'm wrong.
As Councillor Todd says, it was put in the last local plan by the council. I think at that time, as I can't remember quite what we called it, a reserve or a provisional employment site. And basically what the inspector said is that's got to be a firm allocation for employment. So it has been in the local plan for some time, and this carries forward most of what's in the current local plan. I think, as Adrian Fox has said, criteria 3 is clear that development is limited to the previously developed land. It's clear on the ground where that is and the size of it. Criteria 7, basically everything else has got to be secured for public use. So, and various other criteria about impact on the national park. So I think there are a lot of safeguards in there.
Thank you, Mr. Opacek. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I hear that the officers say this is sort of different, but I don't really see it. What is the difference between this fundamentally, given we don't have a master plan, and being in the current local plan? Nothing has happened for the last 10 years. What is going to happen now, particularly when we're deciding to build on Greenfield, but we do have a proportion, only a proportion of this site that is designated as Brownfield. So I am in a dilemma, Chair, as to why this is here when so little has happened on it in the last 10 years, and why we're not being clearer about it, given that we've already turned to Greenfield to try and meet some of our requirements, except that that's on housing. But nonetheless, this seems to sit here just waiting for a miracle to happen again, Chair, and I don't understand what credibility we have with this at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's right, certainly, to raise a question about rolling forward allocations, because what we wouldn't do is just simply continue to roll forward allocations from one plan to the other with no prospect of them being delivered for the uses that we set out. I think with this one, and it's been in the press recently, it was in the Chronicle I was reading a few weeks ago, that there is clearly interest in reactivating the site for employment-led uses. It's a choice, therefore, to roll that forward. But I think without that interest being reignited, then I think you would have to ask yourself the question, does it make any sense to do this when there's no prospect for it? I think as well, I think the world has moved on a bit from when we put it in the last plan. I mean, things like the use classes order has changed and been much broader, and E1 and now encompasses broader uses. And I think whilst there isn't radical change in here in terms of the area that we would envisage would be suitable for development, and that's really important because anybody that's been there, many of you would have done, know just how sensitive this site is. I've never been up on top of the chalk. It really is a sensitive site, and that's why we still wanted to keep the parameters to guide the master plan, which are hopefully explained within the bullet points of the policy, and also picking up on Councillor Laming's point, which is really important about what is developable and what shouldn't be. The only thing, and it's getting a bit technical, and I don't think it's necessarily a defining factor, but in terms of previously developed land, there is a definition in national guidance, NPPF. I don't know that this would, strictly speaking, even meet that in terms of it's been quite a long time since it was actively used and stuff. The point is, it was a decision and allocation within the previous local plan. We've reviewed it for the reasons you've said, because can't roll things forward without any prospect. Clearly, I think the landowners and agents are very interested in reactivating that discussion, and as a result of which, for consultation, we put it in the plan with parameters about the national park, the area that was previously occupied by the army camp, etc., which guides where we consider it would be suitable for development. So hopefully that gives you some assurance as to why it's reappeared in this plan and not simply been omitted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Finch.
So, Chair, just a further question to Mr. Finch. When I was in the hot seat about 4 years ago, they were promising to progress it. Nothing happened. It drifted. With a few weeks to go to the local plan, they suddenly turned up again and invited some of us to discuss the site. And yet we're not further forward. So my question is this a reality that someone has just reignited this at the last moment, when actually we'd be better served if this site isn't truly coming forward to think about other activities and other parts of the plan? And it just feels that we're being manoeuvred here at the last moment, unless officers have been discussing this or other councillors have been discussing this for far longer and know more about the intentions on the site than is visible here. But with the offer of a master plan, that's encouraging, but that was on offer 4 or 5 years ago and we're still no further forward. I'm not reassured, really.
I think so. Obviously, there's so much, in terms of we would have reevaluated it. As I said before, we wouldn't have likely put it back into the plan. Obviously, there are things that we do have those discussions directly with the landowners as well, with all sites, not just Bushfield, any site that's not been developed for whatever reason. And I would say, we feel that there is sufficient interest and activation, etc., to make it justifiable. I mean, I think you're right. There will inevitably have to come a point with any allocated site that if it still doesn't come forward and you still don't get a planning application within a reasonable timeframe through the course of this plan, then inevitably you're going to ask the question again, because I agree you can't simply just keep on allocating sites and they never ever come forward. But we feel that there is sufficient. It's not just a case, I think, of the landowner saying, well, we want it to roll forward and we'll definitely want to engage with you and move it forward within a reasonable time frame. I think we're confident that it's serious. Whether an application materialises, obviously it's not for me to say. I can't predict that. But we think that we've got enough to justify putting it into the plan and consulting on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Finch. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. When I was deputy leader, I always understood that the aspirations of the landowner were different to those of the city council, and they wavered, and eventually they obviously might come to this allocated use, which I think is an excellent compromise in a way, because we don't want to set up another little sort of community of houses, which would be out on a limb, whereas this allocated use would put Winchester to the forefront in what they're good at, and that is creative industries and education. So I'm pleased to see personally this allocated use.
Councillor Todd.
The way I would look at, or the question I would have is, my recollection is that this was put forward in the SHELAG by the developer. So we have an expression of interest from the developer. And my assumption would be that if something had been previously allocated in the local plan and somebody appealed against it and said that the plan was unsound and went to the inspector with it, I would be quite surprised if they didn't get put back in again, except without any protections and policies that we might have put around it. So I think the question is, for me, clearly there's interest, clearly it's been put forward. I'm not entirely sure if Councillor Horrell is asking, is this the right type of use, or should we be allocating it as a different type of use? I think it is the right kind of use. And then the second question, which ties into Councillor Laming's point, which I share, it is a really valuable, stunning, heavily used, important site for people, for leisure purposes, for nature, for biodiversity, for all kinds of things. And I suppose the other question, which is certainly very important to me, and I'm feeling reassured, but if there are specific things that people want to be looked at, is, are we protecting that enough? I think the 20 hectare limit and the other policies that are out there should do that. But if people have specific proposals, then that will be hopefully something that might get picked up during the consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Any further questions on Bushfield Camp? Councillor Horrell?
Chair, in policy W54, it talks about not detracting from Winchester town, but I would suggest that the adjacent parishes of places like Oliver's Battery and the like would also should be included there. So I might suggest that they adjacent parishes are also included.
Yeah, and with your leave, yeah, I think what we mean there, but we can look at that, Councillor Horror, is that it doesn't compete with Winchester town uses in terms of what you wouldn't want there. For example, the sort of out of town retail that might undermine the functioning of the town centre is the point we're making there. But we can look at whether we need to make that a bit more explicit, because obviously it really matters what the impact on the park and neighbouring villages is. But what we also don't want are uses which would take trade directly away from the city centre. That's I think what we mean there. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Finch. Councillor Horrell, did you have any other questions? Anything else on Bushfield Camp before we move on? No. Okay, so we're coming on to W6, looking at Winnell as an employment area. Do we have any questions on this? No. Okay, W7, Central Winchester Regeneration. Councillor Horrell.
My favourite subject, Chair. I made the point this morning, I still advocate that, and Mr. Fox explained to me offline that obviously the SPD is policy which links to the current plan, and obviously we're moving to a new plan. But I think the SPD is so fundamental to the process of selecting a developer that is being is in the system at the moment, being organised by procurement, that I think a more deliberate reference, although it says in here the application must be consistent with the supplementary planning document, it sort of hangs there, and I would be surprised if we should, well, I'd be disappointed if we did not somehow have the SPD as a supporting document to this proposal, which it is in the broader evidence base for this plan.
Mr. Finch.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's why in 1258 in the explanatory text, it does specifically refer to the SPD, as you say, and also in bullet point 1 under W7, again, we reference that specifically. There may be a technical issue that we'll have to wrestle with in terms of readopting things when a new plan supersedes an old plan and everything, which Adrian and Fox and Steve will know a lot more than I will about how you actually do that. But absolutely right, and there's certainly no intention to move away from the SPD that was adopted in 2018. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I just ask then that if there is a technical explanation as to why it's not here, because it's a policy, that people are helped to understand that, because your explanation today has clarified that. Thank you.
One moment, we did also agree at the top of this morning's meeting that we would attach key documents such as movement strategy, Winchester plan and SPD. They will be attached as part of this.
I don't think it can be.
No, it doesn't.
I think if I can come back on that, Chair, the evidence base for the local plan is usually evidence base such as the movement strategy, which we discussed this morning, housing, land information, gypsy and travel accommodation assessment. The SPD is adopted against the current policy in the adopted local plan. When this policy, W7, comes into play in terms of when the local plan is adopted, we will need to update that SPD, and therefore the current SPD will fall away. So I think there's a kind of misunderstanding about the evidence base. We've tried to make it very prominent in this policy, like Mr. Finch has said about the current SPD, and that we will be following it. But obviously, like I say, depends when we get the planning application and when obviously things happen. But like I say, I think there's a danger of putting too much in the evidence base, because in theory, you'd have to put all the village design statements, you'd have to put everything else, all other SPDs in the evidence base. I don't think they are evidence based. They're policies that have been developed to explain obviously an existing policy.
Councillor Hall.
Chair, then I think we should explain that the SPD will be put to one side and updated when the new local plan is adopted, so that people are really clear that the current SPD stands, and that's what we're working to, but it will change as the policy changes, so that given this is a very significant and long-standing development for the city, and as I say, we are procuring against some of the content of the document currently. Thank you.
Councillor Todd.
I think there's a helpful clarification, and I think it'd be useful. The intent is very clear. The first bullet point for Central Winchester says we're going to follow the SPD. If it is possible to put something like, you know, it must be consistent with the SPD agreed against the previous local plan until such time as a new SPD is adopted or something like that, it might be one just to throw to the lawyers to say, can you have it so that, you know, in the 10-minute gap between the two things being done, that we're really clear on our intent in terms of the local policy, recognising that for legal reasons, for it to have the full same force, that there may be a gap, but that is certainly the intent. It is probably I mean, you know, there are, as you know, it's not a secret that some of the assumptions within the SPD, such as the parking assumptions, haven't aged very well. But so I think there will be reasons to update it and bring it up to speed with other policies. But I think it would provide reassurance, because that's certainly the intention, I think, of everybody involved. So that would be a question, a drafting question that maybe ends up with the lawyers or something.
I think just thinking on the Hooth, you could change it to the adopted SPD and then put the date. So you're very clear that obviously it's the adopted SPD and when it was adopted, if that helps.
That clarifies it, recognising if for legal reasons we need to do another one later, it could supersede what we've got in there. So make it future proof. But I think anything we can do to make it really clear that that you know, we have an SPD for the area that we're committed to.
Sorry, Councillor Horrell, I'd already nodded. I thought you.
No, I appreciate the comment made by Councillor Todd. I think that would be helpful, and because there may be a gap between new plan and adopted new policy adopted, and that level of clarity as we segue from one to the other would be helpful. So, however that's best done by the officers, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Porter, you've been looking quite perturbed throughout that discussion. Did you want to speak?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I don't agree, actually. I think it makes it very clear that it is actually the application for development is consistent with the supplementary planning document that has been agreed by the local planning authority. So it actually makes it really clear that it's there already. But I mean, we can debate that as a series of planning.
I think it's one where if we could just have a lawyer look at the language, just to make sure that we're really clear that we are covering
I don't want to tie the old
SPD that's tied to the old local plan, which might not count as an SPD in legal terms until such time as there is an SPD, you know, whatever. But
the officers will look at it as a drafting piece.
That would be appreciated.
I'm confident in the abilities of Mr. Fox to be able to know whether it needs a lawyer or not.
Councillor Evans.
Is it relevant to point out in the supporting text of 12.55 that the antiques market now goes under the name of the Nutshell? I was around there yesterday because we've got a planning application there and it is actually on the building.
Could you email that across as one of the technical points to send to the officers, please, Therese?
I can't hear.
Could you email that to the officers as a point, as one of the technical points? Okay. That would be useful. Thank you. If you could turn off your microphone.
Thank you. I'm not hearing you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Do we have any other questions on this section? No. Okay, on to the next section, W8 station approach regeneration area. Do we have any questions on this section? No. W9, far end depot, page 304 of our packs. No. W10, former River Park Leisure Centre site. Do we have any questions on this? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I'm confused. When this came for approval in the last municipal year, it was very clear that there was no intention for housing on this site. And in fact, in the W10 policy, it says do not include residential development. But then we have reference to development alongside the site for accommodation. And so I'm just questioning what is the true intention of this, given that residents are of the view at the moment that student accommodation is not part of this, but it's edging alongside it now potentially, although as I acknowledge in 9 of W10 it says do not include residential development.
Councillor Porter. Thank
you. I've noticed there's a slight misdescription in the affordable housing paper as well, and I pointed it out to the officers and I completely agree that it implies in one that it is and it isn't, but it's definitely not on that site.
Mr. Fox.
I think to clarify that, it's certainly not the intention on this site. It's obviously at risk from flooding, but the main thing is obviously, I think the last criteria is very clear that obviously if a proposal comes forward, you need to bring forward a proposal off-site for obviously student accommodation if obviously that use comes forward. But it's certainly not the intention to put residential on this site at all.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a sort of new overall approach towards student housing. Now, what some university towns or some towns with universities in like Oxford have done is they've put in place a policy that says if you build extra capacity for your university, you must sort out student accommodation to go with it. I think our take was that that was going to be quite difficult for us to implement as a policy. But what we've effectively done is with each site that's being talked about, we've said you need to sort out the housing that goes with this site. That's the intent behind it. So if you are building extra teaching capacity, extra student capacity, you need to sort out the housing. You can't just assume it's going to happen. And I think that's actually a really positive policy to have in this a really positive thing to be doing with our where we're talking about educating land, allocating land for extra educational capacity in this particular way.
I've just updated
but we
a
just
note
need to make sure the language is unambiguous everywhere where it happens, because we're certainly also of the view there is absolutely no intention that there will be people living on the River Park site.
So I've just written the action to say not residential, update text to clarify.
Chair, you need to update 9.61 on page 220 of the pack, because it talks about provided in this location or nearby, which I think is the point Councillor Porter and I have both spotted. It's in contradiction to what has been said today about the site.
Many thanks for the clarification, Councillor Horrell. Do we have any other questions about the River Park Leisure Centre site? Councillor Reid.
On 12.85 of the supporting document, it's one of those cases again, C section XXX.
Whereabouts was that in the C section?
It's on page, where are we? 268, 266. Top of the page.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions on this site? No. Councillor Reid, can I ask you to switch off your microphone? Okay, moving forwards, coming to policy W11, University of Winchester Royal Hampshire County Hospital. So this policy and the surrounding information. Do we have any questions on this? Councillor Laming.
2 points. Have we assurances from the health authority that they're not going to downsize Winchester Hospital in its entirety? And also, should we not be considering an overall policy for student accommodation? Because we do suffer with a lot of HMOs in various places. So that's.
Councillor Porter.
The joint HOSC is meeting tomorrow with the hospital, so we will know a little bit more tomorrow about that. But also, we do have a policy on student accommodation in here, and it's very clear. And this is why this is sitting here, because it has the potential to do that work. It isn't one-for-one student accommodation to a normal property. It's an equation about roughly 3 or 4 to 1. But nevertheless, this is a potential site. It's so close to the university, University of Winchester, that is, very sustainable. And that's why we're doing it in the very clear aim to reduce the number of HMOs that are needed and the loss of family homes.
Thank you. That was the reassurance that we're all looking for.
Sorry, Mr. Councillor Laming, we can't hear you.
I'm not usually accused of being too quiet. No, I was just saying it's really reassuring because we really need to know that we're doing something on the HMOs because of the effects it have in various parts of the city. And do we have a clear idea of the student numbers which we will be expected to have in Winchester over the next, say, 10 years?
My understanding, it's up to 10,000 at Winchester, the University of Winchester, but we don't have a specific figure for Southampton.
I was going to say, Mr. Fox, I believe there have been conversations, or I don't know if it's Mr. Opacek, there have been conversations between the planning department and the universities and all the educational institutions in Winchester to make sure we understand their needs. I don't know if anybody wants to provide any further clarification on that. That's something we explicitly asked for.
That's correct, Councillor Todd. Myself and Steve Overcheck have been in discussions with the university, particularly Winchester University, about their expansion plans. They obviously haven't yet published their master plan. They've been promising that for a little while, but we've certainly seen and commented on the draft one. But yes, we are in active engagement with them.
Any further questions on W11? No? Okay, so that concludes this section. So the actions I've got, I wrote down at the start of the afternoon, just to clarify, explain the buffer in the plan or the cabinet report is an action. Change the number in the table on page 272, brackets 231 of Winchester Town Centre from 400 to 300. Discussions about Andover Road, St Peter's car park floods. So would development stop that, add criteria about the flooding. W5, again, it's in the Compton Gap. How will the gap be safeguarded? And also it's Greenfield, so just consider that. Look at whether W5 also has an impact on places like Oliver's Battery with regard to businesses as it does Winchester. Put in the date of the SPD for clarification, and again clarify the text on 9.61 of page 220 of the pack to say W10 is not residential. Absolutely not. Any points I've missed? No, we shall.
Yes, sorry, Chair, 961 needs to change, which links back.
That's what I said.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Chair, you didn't mention anything about Sir John Moore, I don't believe.
Yeah, that's the Compton Gap, the W5 ones that I referred to.
No, Sir John Moore is W2.
Oh, apologies. I've talked
So I've
about
asked
the
a
Andover
question
Road.
about the, no, but that was, Andover Road was Marsden Farm, which is W1. W2 is Sir John Moore. And there was a question about the previously developed land, which was discussed.
This is the actions for the officers rather.
Yes, to
than-
clarification
Yeah.
on,
So can you just let me know which one what that was?
so
Clarification.
it's W2, bullet point 4. The previously developed land, Mr. Fox spoke to that.
Apologies.
There was a
Councillor.
question earlier this morning about making sure that people understood why, somewhere in the narrative, why this is in Winchester town, because the local residents.
That is noted at that point.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah.
And also, there was a question regarding if we can put restrictions in the master plan on Kennel Lane, why can't we put the green area at the north of the site in? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've been going for an hour and a half this afternoon, so I suggest we take a 10-minute leg stretch and then we shall continue on after that. So if I could have you back in the room promptly, I'm going to give you 8 minutes again at 3:40, so you lose 2 minutes. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we're moving on to the South Hampshire urban areas, which are on page 314 of your pack, or 273 of the plan. Does anybody have any questions on the that first page before we come on to the specific sites? Councillor Reid.
Chairman, it's a plea, actually, more than anything else. In this particular category, in the policies, the word should appears a great number of times. And should, like would and could, are very weak. They can be interpreted in different ways by different bodies. If we want a strong set of policies, I believe that should be a strong word, such as will. I would like members to consider that, if they would. I have written to Adrian.
If they
an email
will,
to them.
Councillor Reid. Do we all agree with strengthening the language? Yes, yes.
Agreed.
Councillor Porter?
We like the idea, and I've tried myself, but I'm advised that the lawyers have a view. So I can't promise that that would happen, but we would be able to find out whether that's possible.
Mr. Sutherland, are you able to comment on that?
Chair, we have had advice from leading council throughout this process, and I suspect that that's where the advice has come from previously. I'm sure we'll go back to seeking his advice on the wording again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any comments on that first page before we move on to the specific policies? No? Okay, so we're coming on to the first policy, which is allocations west of Waterlooville, including Newlands. Oh, sorry, allocations, apologies. To the allocations west of Waterlooville, including Newlands. I shall email across some technical issues amongst Newlands to you. Do we have any questions specifically on this site allocation? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. On the fourth line down, under policy SH1, it says the word about. I'm not quite sure why it's about, because we should know the actual number on that one. And looking at bullet point 3, does this include within that 23 hectares the land in the Taylor Wimpey area, which was taken from industrial to residential? And I've got 2 more, if I may. How is the master plan, which has already been agreed and is technically, I understand, the outline planning permission, how does that stand if there are any changes within this? Do we need, or will we need, to be looking at a, so I'm trying to find the wording now, a variation in the deed for, so I can't find it now. Yes, a variation in the deed that already exists for the site.
Okay, Councillor Porter.
I presume you're referring to the 250, the one that was the school and
Sorry.
was. I presume you're referring to the 250 that was allocated for the school site. Ah, you're talking.
Sorry, I'm more interested in the how do we stand with the master plan, which is already outlined? Would we have to look for a deed of variation also in the design code?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Fox.
Mr. Opachik, if you can pick this one up for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have been in discussions. We did have an initial meeting with the parish councils, Newlands and Southwick, and Councillor Reid was there to talk about the approach to west of Waterlooville and the aim of looking to see whether that could be intensified. We've also been in discussion with Granger, who are the main developer. As you say, the Taylor Wimpey development was part of West of Waterlooville. That's now built, and that is included in the about 3,000 overall. Granger believe they can increase the capacity of the development without changing the planning permission, on the basis that the outline planning permission is fairly flexible. The sustainability appraisal that went with it tested a higher number of houses. But obviously, if there are changes that are significant, then that would require a new planning application. And I think they are thinking that they have already made some changes within the scope of the existing consent. Like some time ago, they did the private rented scheme, which has actually freed up more capacity elsewhere in the site. But I think they are thinking they will need to put in a new planning application to achieve the level of development that we're looking, or level of increase that we're looking at here. And obviously, if they did, then we would have to go back to the Section 106 agreement and see whether that required amending alongside that.
With regards to the Taylor Wimpey, whilst the residential is built out, the industrial isn't.
That is still a requirement that should be developed for employment. I mean, that will be within the 23 hectares of employment that's in the third bullet point under SH1. So that is, and you'll see from the previous page, the current master plan area, that is the existing master plan, or the sort of key elements of it. And the area that you're talking about, I think, is the brown strip up on the sort of top left-hand side. So that is still in there as an employment area, as is the other employment area at what is now called Proxima Park, the other big darker brown area there.
Councillor Reid, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it at the West of Waterlooville Forum where last time they wanted to increase the housing numbers above what had already been outlined as the maximum, as the number we would have on site? And we had to agree that, or may I come to Mr Tilbury, who would have recalled that at the time, apologies, but you were there at the time, weren't you? That had to be agreed, didn't it, the increase in numbers? It did. So I'm not sure if we needed to do that again. Thank you, Mr Tilbury. Apologies for referring to you. I knew you'd recall.
I think certainly Granger's understanding is, yes, that was agreed within the terms of the existing planning consent. But what we're talking about now could be increasing the numbers further, and they think they may have to put in a new planning application for that.
With regard to the West of Waterlooville Forum and the Joint Planning Committee, that I believe is now going to be under review because it's not working as it should at this point in time. It's dying, but I know the leader has been in consultation with the leader of Havant Borough Council, who are like-minded. So I think we may well see a change for the good for both committees.
One moment, Councillor Todd. Councillor Reid, have you looked at the draft Havant plan Reg 18, which I haven't, because I'm wondering if they're allocating additional housing to the Newlands West of Waterlooville site as well. I'm just wondering how that would impact further the numbers. I need to have you considered that?
We haven't looked at it yet. We have discussed this with Havant, and they were supportive of increasing the capacity, but from memory, I don't recall them saying that they had any scope to increase capacity on their side. The only site they did talk about, and which I would expect they have allocated, is what's called the Blue Star site, which you probably know is a site on Morapar Way within their area, and I think that's already allocated in their current local plan anyway. So I think that's the only area they're looking at, but I haven't checked that yet.
It's actually one of the only areas left for development on the Havant border.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
I was going to make 2 points briefly. So one is, I would certainly appreciate that we have a look at our allocation of sites in context, particularly in this area, in context of the sites that Havant has put in their Reg 18, which they have agreed and is due to go public on October the 8th. But I think if we could get early sight of which sites they are proposing to allocate, because it may be possible that some of our sites that we might not have allocated are contiguous to their sites, and at that point it becomes a very sensible thing for a joint consideration. I'd confirm the point that Councillor Reid makes, which I spoke to the leader of Havant, Councillor Alex Rennie. They are very interested in ensuring that their work to redevelop the centre, that representatives of people living in, well, one of the other things we discussed, West Waterlooville, not west of it, it is now part of it. And that needs to be considered as well.
That should be decided at the Waterlooville Forum, I'd propose.
Yes.
And also they have called it Knightswood in their draft plan.
Right. And then the last thing, you know, and then there are other considerations going on where we also talked about, which aren't in the scope of this meeting. But for example, there is consultation going at the moment about provision of leisure services in Waterlooville and potential changes to the leisure centre, and that is obviously one where our residents need to be actively consulted just as much as anybody else is, partly to help them ensure they're making sound decisions. But I think I would appreciate if it was possible just to check the allocations in this area versus the Reg 18 in Havant to see if that changes any of our considerations or adds new potential sites that might be possible.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Do we have any further questions on the Newlands, west of Waterlooville area? No, again, like I say, between Councillor Reid and I will send you across some of the technical considerations. Moving on to allocations North Whiteley. Do we have any questions on the North Whiteley policy allocation policy SH2? No? Okay, moving on to the allocations of Whiteley Green and policy SH3. Do we have any questions on this piece? Allocations of Solent Business Park, policy SH4. Do we have any questions of this? No? Okay. Allocations of Little Park Farm, policy SH5. Little Park Farm in Whiteley. Any comments on this site? No. Allocations of Hotley Bypass, policy SH5. Do we have any questions or considerations for this? Then we shall move on to, with the only action on that section being to check the sites within the Havant draft Reg 18 and see how that impacts our thoughts on Newlands and Havant and west of Waterlooville. We will now move on to the market housing. Oh, yeah, and strengthening language, but I've included that as sort of a side note because it wasn't specifically in that section. Okay, development allocations, market towns and rural area. So does anybody have any questions on the initial information before we come on to the specific sites and policies? No? Okay. So coming on to the first one then, which is the Vineyard Tangier Lane in Bishop's Waltham, policy BW1. Does anybody have any questions on this allocation? No. Policy BW2, Albany Farm. Any questions on that one? No. Tollgate Sawmill allocation, policy BW3. Do we have any comments or questions on that one? Land north of Rare Ridge Lane, policy BW4. Market towns, coming on to New Alresford, and the first site we have there is the Dean. Do we have any questions on the Dean? Councillor Cook.
It refers to, Chair, thank you, 50 spaces, and I was actually there yesterday And I don't think you'll find it is 50 spaces now that's looking there. I think it's actually, they're talking a lesser amount, 42. And there was concerns about the location of the car park, but that's probably not the right venue today to be talking about that. But I just thought I would mention it. Thank you.
Which section is it referring to where it says 50 spaces?
Forgive me.
The environmental, that
It's
one.
on the other infrastructure, and it refers to include provision for a public car park owned by Winchester City Council, and it says 50 there, but
and you think it's 42?
I believe it's 42, but that has gone down. Oh, Steve has something to say.
Sorry, Mr. Okachick.
That's right. The owners of that area of land are working up a planning application, and the latest version we've seen is 42. This was in the current local plan 50 to 100, as you know, or probably know. We've reduced it to about 50. We want to keep a decent size car park in there. So I think rather than accept 42, we'd rather keep it as about 50 and be able to push for as many as we can fit on there reasonably, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Okachick. Any other questions on that one? Housing allocations at Sun Lane then. Policy NA2. Do we have any questions? Councillor Reid.
Can maybe Mrs. Pinnock can remind us, this site has got full planning permission for both residential and the very small section at the bottom for industrial. That is correct, isn't it? Okay, just thought I was going mad.
Just as a point of clarification.
Yeah, and the park in the middle, yes.
As a point of clarification, it has got planning permission, but obviously the site hasn't started, so hence why we've rolled it forward to this plan. We've taken the view, obviously, if development hasn't started on site, we should roll forward that policy, because obviously if we don't roll it forward, there'll be a policy vacuum if obviously they don't implement the permission. I don't think there's any indication they wouldn't implement the permission, but that's the logic why it's in there.
Thank you. I'm assuming that nobody has any questions on policy NA3, the neighbourhood plan for Alresford, because it's not here yet. So I shall move on to the larger, Councillor Cook.
Sorry, with the Alresford Sun Lane, I'm thinking it's the Wimpy company that the developer, as I understand. I sincerely hope they remember to put dropped curbs into all their estate, as they forgot to in Golden Common, which makes it very difficult for pedestrians and cyclists to move around the estate. But I don't see that in there unless I've missed it. Normally it's written in some of the plans about the cycling and walking infrastructure in that estate. I don't see it as, unless I've missed it. Have I missed it somewhere?
Mr. Okachick.
Oh, it's okay, access. It's okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So coming on to Golden Common, and we have the first area of Clayfield Park. Do we have any questions on this one, please? Policy CC1. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. The concerns are, obviously it's on the main road, and there is another development there as well, which is the farm. We really must make sure, we talked about wording, about should, coulds and woulds. On page 361 of the report, 14.5, it refers to arrangements should be made for safer crossing points. No, they have to be made, because the main road is a fast road, despite what the speed limit is. It should be lower to encourage cyclists and pedestrians, but there needs to be a crossing there. It refers to safe crossing points, but with these two developments, there needs to be better facilities for people to be able to cross the road to get to the other side or either side of the village. Otherwise, they're cut off. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Cook. Did you have any comment on that, Mr Opachik, before we come to councillor Porter?
Madam Chair. Yes, we're liaising with County Council Highways Department on this, and they've already seen that these sites have been allocated, so they should be aware of that. I'll check the wording with that and whether, you know, what degree we need to specify the safe crossing. Sorry, could you just cross-refer to paragraph number again, please, because I didn't catch it. Yes, 15.5. Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you, councillor Porter.
Thank you. I think I've had the benefit of going through the Taylor Wimpey site at Colden Common as well, so that and the agony of and the ecstasy of building it. So very aware of those issues. But the important point is that all of those along the main road have S106 sums attracted to them. The problem is if that S106 is not spent, the work remains unfinished, even though the properties are built. And the question I'd like any of the occupants of Colden Common to comment on really is that doesn't provide them with a sustainable way of reaching the other side of the village. It's useful to have the public input into that statement as well as our input into that statement. It's something we've raised with the County Council already.
Thank you, councillor Porter. Okay, coming on to the next one. So Colden Common Farm, I think that's the one you've already strayed into. Did you have any further comments on that one, councillor Cook? Nope. Okay, moving on to the land at Main Road in Colden Common. Do we have any questions on this site, this allocation? No. Okay, coming on to land adjoining 85 Church Lane, councillor Cook.
Yes, we do, because the figures have actually been changed on this one from 5 dwellings, we understand, to an additional further 5, which makes the 10, because we were going to be allocated 90 to 100. We came up with 3 sites which added up to 85, but a visit has been made and it's been deemed that a further 5 can be added to that particular plot of land. The concerns have been, and this may once again stop me if it's not the correct time to mention it, that we want to make sure that the building line is continued. We don't want it to go back too deep, as it does in another area of Colden Common. But maybe that's an architectural and planning
Consultation,
yes,
rather than.
But I've mentioned it.
So
today.
ensure that you and
Thank
other
you.
residents submit that there.
Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
councillor Cook. Larger rural settlements, Denmead. So we're now on page 368 or 327 of the actual plan. Do we have any questions on the pre-information before we get to the councillor Reid?
Denmead is not a question with regarding Denmead. It's the fact that last night they received their housing allocation numbers. So they are now going to work on that particular element of it and hopefully get it into the plan in the not too distant future.
Thank you, councillor Reid. Can I just a point of clarification on this? When I asked a question about this a week ago, it was said that the windfall numbers hadn't yet been received or were due imminently. Are they included in this report or are they not?
Yes, so I've had a lot of toing and froing with the parish council's consultant that's working on the neighbourhood plan to try and agree and tie down housing completions, commitments, windfall and so on. And as far as I'm aware, that is agreed and these figures reflect it. So the completions figure will include windfall sites such as Parklands where they have been completed so far. I think Parklands was one of the main issues that the parish council had. The outstanding permissions will again include any windfall. neighbourhood plan allocations, that's obviously site specific. And then on top of that, there is an allowance for future windfall, which is the 50 dwellings in that table. So as officers, we believe we've taken on board the points that the parish council made, and hopefully they will agree that as well.
It just feels 357 when we have the 250 less than 2 miles away is a really high allocation in a 2 mile radius. There's 600 new homes. It just feels large. I'll submit that as part of the consultation though. Okay, coming on to the next part, the larger rural settlements again within Denmead, who are policy D1 doing their neighbourhood plan. Nothing further to say on that. Councillor Reid, nothing further to say on that? Nothing further to say regarding the neighbourhood plan in Denmead?
No.
Thank you. Coming on to, again, the larger rural settlements, Kingsworthy. We have Cornerways and Merrydale. Does anybody have any comments to make on those sites? No. Lands adjoining the cart and horses, policy KW2. Anything on that? Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether the word is pleased to read, but on page 377, it refers to, I don't need to read the whole thing to you, but there's a quote there, and it refers to the Basingstoke London Road and the B3047, which has a poor safety record. That's an understatement, to be honest with you. I sincerely hope and pray that we are having serious talks with Highways about that particular area. Even though we are looking at a 70 dwelling equivalent home for older people, those people I'm sure will still have cars possibly. So that's going to have an increase to the amount of traffic that goes on that road. And I've personally experienced that road, and I'm sure that Councillor Porter has on many occasions making way back to her home. So I see it as a very dangerous road, and I sincerely hope that serious talks take place and it's made safer.
Councillor Porter.
It's a real credit to Kingsworthy Parish Council and the extensive consultation they did, that the public felt that the loss of a small piece of greenfield there compared to the potential that it could bring to a junction was a balance they chose to make. And I think it's a real credit to that community that they took that on and have really looked at what homes they need in that community.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I've made a note to liaise with HCC. I'll come back to that at the end. Okay. So moving onwards, we come to Wickham. Housing allocations for policy WK1, Winchester Road housing and open space allocation. Do we have any questions on this one? No. Policy WK2, the glebe housing and open space allocation. Any questions on this allocation? No. Policy WK3 with regard to the land located between Knowle and Wickham. Do we have any questions on this allocation? No.
No.
Between Knowle and Wickham.
Yes, if I may.
Councillor Reid.
The Ravenswood land. I am very, very surprised and very concerned. Everybody knows what Ravenswood is. It's not just a mental hospital. It's the next step down from Broadmoor. It is a secured facility. It's a good 10 to 15 minutes walk. So yes, it comes within the 15-minute walk to Wickham, down a private road, with no footways, quite narrow in places. The amenities at Knoll are very sparse. Facilities also very sparse. So the nearest foot passage is down Miles Lane. If you get in the car, you end up on the Fareham Road, and I would suggest that 9 times out of 10, they turn right and go to Fareham to do their shopping. My concern is the element of safety because of the regional secure unit at Ravenswood. You are intending to surround it. And when I worked there at Knoll, when it was a mental hospital, we were always having, well, at least once a week, helicopters up looking for their clients who had done a walkabout. So just a bit of concern about that, but it doesn't seem to meet our original criteria of facilities close at hand. They've got to walk into Wickham or they will drive into Fareham.
Mr. Opacek, can I ask you to comment on those points, please? Oh, Toby.
Yes, I understand the comments council is making. What I'd like to just add at this point is that really this allocation is reflecting the planning application that's been progressed to decision some considerable time ago. And so that application went through a process of considering those elements of it, indeed that it was acceptable at that time. You all know, of course, that the application has yet to be issued and obviously development is yet to be started, but to capture this development in this strategy, which we do anticipate will come forward, that it's appropriate to allocate it in this plan. So I don't see much point in giving you another reiteration of those discussions at this point. We've been here before, frankly, Councillor, I would say.
I just feel really concerned.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Reid. Coming into intermediate rural settlements, Hursley. Does anybody have any comments on the HU1 area? The neighbourhood plan's going to pick it up. Any comments about that? No. Oh, Councillor Laming.
Just a matter of interest, are we putting a maximum cap on the number of houses that Hursley would accept? And have they got to be adjacent to the actual settlement boundary of Hursley itself? I ask this because of the applications that went in for Pit Vale 1, Pit Vale 2, the golf course, Royal Down, etc.
Mr. Opacek.
Chair, when Hursley started their neighbourhood plan, they declared a neighbourhood plan area, and the City Council had to approve that. And in doing that, we wrote to them and said, you should be, in your neighbourhood plan, you should just be looking at small and medium sites around the edge of Hursley Village. The sites in Hursley Parish, the large sites like Pitt Manor and the big sites that are technically in Hursley Parish, actually adjoin Winchester, and that is for the City Council to look at through the local plan, and they are, in neighbourhood plan terms, they're of a strategic scale, and the neighbourhood plan shouldn't touch them. So there isn't a limit on it, but that is for the neighbourhood plan to decide how many they want. So, but they would be limited to around the village boundary.
Thank you, because you can imagine how concerned the people in Oliver's Battery are with being surrounded. Thank you.
Councillor Porter.
I confirmed that with Councillor Colleen only days ago, and to confirm that it is just still the same area that they're looking at, so this shouldn't concern anybody. It was as part of a conversation I was having with parishes to make sure their neighbouring parishes knew what was going on.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Okay, coming on to Otterbourne, the Gladman land off. Oh, Councillor Laming, is this Otterbourne or is this still on Hursley?
No, we're on to Otterbourne now.
Fabulous.
The site that we've allocated is particularly sensitive in terms of runoff of water and that, because it's right next to the boreholes which supply Winchester, Southampton, Eastleigh and the Isle of Wight. So I would like to make sure that whatever we do in the planning applications that go in for that is fully protected and looked at properly. And also that as this is only half the site, we ensure that the other half is down for public amenity value.
Mr. Fox?
I'd just quickly add on Otterbourne, we have had a response from the parish council, I think a day or so ago, which had some helpful points of clarification that we need to address with this policy, particularly about the bit that wouldn't be developed. But they seem very sensible suggestions that we could address.
Would those be included before the consultation?
I think we can add them probably to the list, Chair, if you're honest, because they were minor things. I think, for example, one, we called it the Gladman land. I don't think we should be calling it Gladman land. Gladmans are a land promoter, so it's minor things like that that can be addressed, but they were happy with the principle.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. So we all heard at the start several representations from South Wonston. So we're moving on to South Wonston now. Within the room, do we have any questions about settlement boundary adjustment? I know we had them say that a site was outside the settlement boundary, so they are adjusting that settlement boundary. Do we have any questions on that at all? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I think the members of the public and parish representatives who came were slightly shocked to see these sites in, as were the ward councillors, particularly the Greenfield site. And it's sort of inappropriate access from a highways point of view. The parish have questioned the the settlement hierarchy details, which they've tried to correct. And I think they've articulated a number of issues with the proposal in the draft local plan. It seems to me, based on the documentation, that we're in a position where we'll have to challenge this at consultation. But I am concerned that they still believe that the settlement hierarchy information is not accurately calculated. I don't know whether officers can comment on that, please.
I just wanted to say that feels like a technical bit that should be emailed in to be updated. But Mr. Opacek?
Chair, I was just going to say that where we've deferred the Homes for All chapter, I was going to explain the housing numbers, the settlement hierarchy and so on in introducing that, if that's okay. So if you're happy to leave that until then. But certainly we have taken on board all the comments that various parish councils have made about facilities and services in their patch and updated the settlement hierarchy as a result of that. So that's a short answer to that one.
Thank you, Mr. Opacek. So coming on to the two sites, we have the land at west of Hill Road North, policy SW01. Are there any specific comments on that? Councillor Horrell.
I think fundamentally, Chair, the policy, the local plan committed to not building in the countryside, to build on Brownfield, and we've done exactly that here. And I think we're struggling to justify why such an obscure site has been put in to the plan and when other Brownfield sites exist.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Coming on to Sutton Scotney, we have what? Jeez, I can't see the policy number in Sutton Scotney. So we've got 20 houses being put forward there. Is that, I can't see the specific policy on that. Councillor Hall?
Chair, just to put on record today, this is a community that would like housing. They feel that that would be really beneficial to their community. What we're suffering from here is the lack of infrastructure, which is a point I think we raised this morning, and the infrastructure does not support the development of a site that was identified. And I think that's a lesson for this plan and future plans as we roll forward on the 5-year plan, to join hands more cohesively with those who are providing those services to a community. So interestingly, this is one community who would like the housing and we can't have it. And the fundamental issue here is sewerage, and they can't cope with the new houses they already have in the community, let alone having more. So an interesting dilemma for us all to learn from in terms of how we try and develop the district going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Boar Hunt is absolutely the same, Councillor Horrell. They are crying out for housing, but again, they're not close enough to Wickham for the infrastructure. Councillor Porter.
I think actually in the discussions with parishes over the last few months, it's been really interesting because the criteria was set in 2019, 2020. And actually over that time, the world's changed such a lot that our needs are very different than they were then. In practical terms, a lot of people are spending a lot more time at home. And so actually they're going to the toilet at home more. But also that's a really practical one, but also we've got other sites that are joining on. They're not the sort of things we normally do a tick box for. We do a tick box for warehousing in that area. Actually, sewage in that area and water supply, electricity, consistent electricity supply are the sort of things we should be looking for in the future. Deliveries, post office, all sorts of things that were very relevant 5 years ago. And I think it's a lesson that I will learn from this, not just today, but I'm learning from the whole thing, is that the criteria that we're discussing as being essential are not necessarily the ones that are going to be necessary for development in future.
Councillor Horrell.
Yeah, it's not pertinent to this plan, but it's probably a piece of work for Mrs. Adey and her team, which is that future requirement that we have to understand what those other facilities are for the plan in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And it takes so long to do that with some of these organisations. We need a work stream now to be able to bring some of that forward realistically. So outside of this, there's a parallel piece of work for next time round. Thank you, Chair.
So the next housing allocation we have is at the Lakes. And this is policy SW1. Do we have any comments on that allocation? No. Coming on to Waltham Chase. The housing allocation at Morgan's Yard, which was, I believe, rolled over from the previous plan. Is that correct? Any comments on policy WC1 there? No. Okay, so we come on to the local plan monitoring framework. Does anybody have any okay, yeah. Chris Rees, are you still here? Yes. You represented a site that wasn't included in the allocations. Did we want to pick that up? Who should I refer that to? Mr. Finch?
If we can identify the site, and I was going to ask whether either Mr. Obercheck or Mr. Ayling could just say something about that in terms of, it goes back to something we'll talk about in a bit more detail, but as it was specifically raised, it would be good to pick it up now, I think. If we can identify which site that was.
Chair, so Littleton Nurseries that Mr. Rees raised, which is a site on the edge of Littleton. Littleton, as you'll see, isn't in the hierarchy or isn't in the list of settlements that have been given a housing allocation. So the simple answer is we weren't looking for housing sites in Littleton. That may be a brownfield site, but the strategy of the plan is not simply brownfield first or every brownfield site. It's give priority to brownfield sites which are in a sustainable location and which accord with the local plan strategy. So to release a site on the edge of Littleton or some other smaller village that doesn't have good facilities wouldn't be consistent with that. I think that this may again come back to the settlement hierarchy, which we'll probably cover under Homes for All.
Mr. Rees, does that answer your question in any way? Yes?
I've spoken to Mr. Obercheck about this. We differ fundamentally on the sustainability of Littleton. As a council, there's 900 new homes go into Littleton Parish. It is on the edge of Winchester. It is a sustainable location for housing. We are within 2 kilometres of a range of services and facilities within Week. To look at Littleton as an isolated village is incongruous to sustainable travel patterns, particularly when there's a bus route coming through the village down into Winchester. I live in the area. I know exactly how sustainable Littleton is. It is wrong to look at it in isolation, particularly as the council. The council is not doing that with the barracks. The council is looking at the barracks to serve Winchester. There's no difference with the nursery. It can serve Winchester in terms of its housing numbers, and it can be accessible to the services and facilities within Winchester.
Thank you for your feedback, Mr. Rees. So to summarise those points before we come on to the spatial strategy, we have NA1, just a note that the 50 spaces of public provision car parking are currently 42. CC1, the word should put in a crossing, suggest it says will put in a crossing. KW2 talks about the B3047 safety record, asking officers to liaise with Hampshire County Council about this. Further, WK4 is talking about the suitability and sustainability of Ravenswood based on the fact there's no pavements, and also the security levels of Ravenswood and the impact that could have on the housing surrounding it. Policy 01, Otterbourne one, just saying it's a sensitive site to make sure we assess that properly, and that the parish feedback on that will be included prior to the consultation. We've got South Wonston. Came as a surprise to them. I didn't have any specific actions on South Wonston. I'm not sure if
we're going to check it in the settlement hierarchy when we come to
Mr.
Obercheck's piece on.
And then we had Sutton Scrutiny, who would like housing infrastructure. Same with Borehunt, but the infrastructure does not support this. So let's look at future requirements of plan in 5 years, so that perhaps some of these settlements might be able to have the housing that they would like. Is there anything anybody feels I missed there? Oh, okay. Thank you. So we're moving on to the local plan monitoring framework and the spatial strategy. So if we come on to policy SP1 and vision objectives, we have a number of planning applications, refused planning permission that do not meet the vision objectives of the plan. SP2. So in general, does anybody have any questions on any of those SP1, SP2, SP3?
I think it's asking to go through them just a general point.
Yeah. On the carbon neutrality piece, any further questions on those? Councillor Horrell.
I think we mentioned this morning, didn't we, about that sort of monitoring of the data, and somehow that we have, because it's not just about refusals and the like, it's actually understanding that data. So whatever methodology we said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions on the high quality place and living well, the D policies in there? Councillor Horrell.
Again, this morning we talked about the fact we have the policy for things like fibre and sewerage, and how we're going to monitor that. It's not just about refusals, potentially, it could be about time. So again, we talked about how we're going to, we had the whole question of timely, what does that mean? Thank you.
Thank you. Biodiversity and the natural environment. Do we have any further questions on this section? No. And then that's all we can do on that, because we need to come back to the main policies, which we didn't cover this morning, before we can cover this part. So thank you. That concludes our part on site allocations. Councillor Horrell?
Sorry, Chair, you were rushing on, and we've got South Downs National Park here, and we had quite an extensive discussion about that this morning. We talk about the number of planning applications and the recommendations made by us, which are not supported by the authority. But I'm not sure that we've got clarity, unless that's happened offline today, in terms of the 500 we've asked of the South Downs National Park and the proximity to all of our other boundaries and the crossover. So is there a metric here that we're looking for, or are we just letting that flow through? What are we doing with that discussion, which was very helpful this morning, but I'm not sure I'm clear any specific actions now or a follow-up with South Downs. If they don't come up with the 500, what are we going to do, for example? Or if we don't like where they're going, what are we going to do?
Mr. Fox or Mr. Opachik?
Chair, I think that's part of the monitoring of the overall housing provision. We've got a district-wide housing target that small element in the park will contribute to. So I think that is covered under the monitoring of policies H1, H2 and H3, where we look at the number of planning permissions and whether that's achieving targets. And what we can do about the national park failing to achieve targets or overachieving is debatable, but that's where we would look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Opachik. So we've concluded the allocations piece. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, one of the Homes for All, which we haven't done, but we've got the monitoring piece here, and it talks about obviously some of the gypsy and traveller sites. Where a site is currently under appeal, can I just clarify how we're going to measure that? Because obviously we're in a parallel process with the inspector, just so that everyone is clear what's in the plan and what's running alongside it and how they come together ultimately. Just that would be helpful for people to understand that dynamic.
I'll take that now, but I'd prefer that we do the rest of this document after we've covered the main policies. That's why we've not got to that.
Sorry, I'm happy to hold that then, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we've concluded that section on allocations and as much as we can of the spatial strategy piece. So what I'd suggest is I give you an actual, how long do you need to get a coffee if you want one? Do you want 15 minutes? Right, so 15 minutes, which brings us nice roundedly back to 10 to 5. So if I can have you all back in the room at 10 to 5, that would be much appreciated.
I think given as you're not going to make any immediate decisions, that you can continue. I'm sure there'll only be 5 minutes.
I just want to put on the record that Councillor Reid has needed to leave. So he has now left the meeting. So moving onwards, we're coming to biodiversity and the natural environment. Policies NE 1 to 17. Jill, I understand you're going to give us a brief introduction to this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think it's really particularly important post-COVID that we are protecting the environment, and I think that's brought home to a lot of people the value that countryside and green space has for everybody. The existing plan contains policies to protect the countryside, and they have been largely successful, and many of them are actually carried forward into the new plan. But we have some new challenges as well. First of all, we are trying our utmost to do brownfield first approach with greenfield second, and you will have picked that up in some of our allocations that we're actually delaying starts on developments on greenfield sites. There are also changes in legislation that we've had to take on board, in particular biodiversity net gain and the requirement that there will be to provide at least 10% biodiversity net gain on development sites, which should leave them in better condition post-development than they were before. There are all sorts of conflicting interests in the countryside. There's farming, food production, recreation, and the local plan can help to sort of allocate open spaces for those. We are reinforcing our green and blue infrastructure requirements through this plan. And also we're including a specific policy for nutrient neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lee. Appreciate that. So turning to the information itself, do we have any questions on the background to this before we come on to the specific policies? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't quite hear what you said. Okay, I have a comment on the NE1. Can I make a comment there?
You may. I was just asking if there's any questions on the backgrounds before we get to the individual policies.
Sorry, I'll do that in a
but
minute.
There was nobody forthcoming, so continue with NE1.
Okay, right. I just wanted to flag up to the team whether they felt that it's new development. New development is not the same as old development, because old development has cracks in the roof and whatever for species. And I am concerned about the rapid decline in some of these species. And people who sit on the planning committee will know that it's swift, but it's also sparrows and hedgehogs. So I think, you know, the existing communities are okay, but could the team consider writing something about new development so that they put up things like swift boxes and gaps for hedgehogs and that sort of thing?
Mrs. Lee, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, there's certainly something that we will consider, and I've been talking to our ecologist about actually whether we put it in a policy or in an SPD, and it's probably something that will come through with the 10% biodiversity net gain requirements as well, that people will be looking to score points, if you like, by putting these sorts of things in developments for hedgehogs and bats and swifts, but not necessarily all species, but some of
yeah,
them.
Thank you. Because some of these things have disappeared. It's not that they're keeping the status quo, it's they've just completely gone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Do we have any other questions or points to make on policy NE1? No, then I shall move on to policy and surrounding information about NE2 the major commercial, educational MOD establishments in the countryside. Do we have any? Councillor Horrell?
Chair, thank you. Just to clarify, if an institution does not have a master plan, then we're not just going to take piecemeal applications from them, because we have done that in the last planning cycle. So applications have come in without a master plan, but if this is being applied to all educational MOD establishments, etc., that would be beneficial and offer clarity. But am I clear in understanding, without a master plan, that type of institution can't just have an application on an individual project? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, we hope that we've sort of mopped everything up in here. In fact, we've specifically added MOD into the title of the policy, because this is a carried forward policy that's in the existing plan, because that was something that came out of the SIP consultation, was a lot of people had concerns about MOD developments in the countryside. I think, I mean, I'll defer to Julie on this. We have worded it such that we will support these establishments and help them prepare master plans so that we know what their requirements are and can help them to meet them. But if it came to a planning application that came about without a master plan, we might have to consider it. I'm not sure that you could necessarily just refuse it on the basis that they didn't have a current master plan. Julie, do you want to add to that one?
I think I just echo what you'd say, really. I think, you know, you'd have to assess what the application was before you and why it would or wouldn't be okay to proceed to determine it in the absence of a master plan. And I think that may depend on the scale and nature of the proposal and also what your recommendation might be. I just think just refusing it on lack of master plan on its own would be a really difficult one to defend in the event of an appeal. And I think that's just something, you know, an application stage would be mindful of. But it doesn't mean to say, you know, any pre-app or any engagement that we have with any of these landowners that we will be encouraging master planning, because that's what we want to see, and we want to understand what their longer term proposals are and how then applications that come forward fit into that.
Councillor Horrell?
So, Chair, I mean, Sparshall College doesn't have a current master plan, and yet we've been dealing with some pretty significant applications over the recent years. So I just think if we intend for this to be meaningful, we need to tell those institutions that we would expect that, because that's helpful to all of us, to your point, that we understand what their direction of travel is and what they'd like to do, and therefore it all sort of becomes obvious as they come forward on individual applications. So I think if this is to be effective, we do need to make that point really clearly so that they can prepare for that. We shouldn't just spring it on them, obviously, but if this is where we're heading, and I think it would help all of us to understand what their intentions are, MOD as well, etc. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Anything else on any two? Okay, we're on